The world is quick to judge what people carry, but it rarely asks why. Every night at exactly 9:15, when the last customers drifted out and the automatic doors slid shut for the final time, Emma Carter walked to the back of the grocery store with the same quiet routine. The employees barely noticed her anymore. She was just the young woman from the evening shift who always volunteered to break down empty shipping boxes after stocking the shelves. The cardboard smelled faintly of fresh produce and laundry detergent, and the cool October air carried the scent of rain as she folded each box with careful hands instead of crushing it like everyone else. "You know those are headed for the recycler, right?" one of the warehouse workers joked as he wheeled another cart toward the loading dock. Emma smiled politely without looking up. "I know. Then why do you keep asking to take them home?" another employee laughed. "Planning to build yourself a mansion?" A few people chuckled before climbing into their cars. Emma only thanked the night manager, tied another bundle of flattened boxes together with old packing twine, and lifted the awkward stack into her arms. They were heavier than they looked, nearly blocking her view as she crossed the dimly lit parking lot toward the bus stop. Across the lot, a black SUV rolled to a stop beside the loading dock. Daniel Brooks had spent the last hour inspecting one of the regional grocery chains his logistics company supplied. At 39, he had built Brooks Logistics into one of the fastest-growing distribution companies in the Midwest, but tonight's visit had been unannounced. He preferred seeing how things actually worked after executives went home. As he signed a few final reports inside his vehicle, movement near the bus stop caught his attention. A young woman, maybe in her mid-20s, stood quietly beneath a flickering streetlight surrounded by a mountain of flattened cardboard. She wore a faded gray hoodie beneath her store apron, worn sneakers darkened by years of use, and work gloves with frayed fingertips. She looked exhausted, yet there was something strangely gentle about the way she steadied the boxes whenever the wind threatened to scatter them across the sidewalk. Daniel glanced toward the store manager beside him. "Does she always do that?" The manager shrugged. "Pretty much every shift. She insists on taking whatever boxes we don't need." "Why?" "No clue. Maybe she sells them. Maybe she burns them for heat." "Never asked." Daniel watched as the city bus pulled up with a hiss of compressed air. Emma carefully loaded the stack first, apologizing to the driver for taking extra space before quietly taking a seat near the back. "No embarrassment. No complaints. Just gratitude." Something about that unsettled him. People chasing easy money usually moved with urgency. She moved with purpose. 10 minutes later, Daniel's SUV passed the bus at a traffic light. He could see Emma through the window, resting one hand on the bundle, as though she were protecting something valuable instead of discarded packaging. His 8-year-old son, Noah, had once looked at an old broken toy with that same expression after his mother passed away. Not because the toy was worth anything, but because memories sometimes hid inside ordinary things. Daniel looked away for a moment, then back toward the bus disappearing into the rainy streets. He couldn't explain the feeling settling in his chest. It wasn't curiosity alone. It was the uncomfortable realization that he had already written her story in his mind without knowing a single fact. Maybe she was collecting scrap for money. Maybe everyone else was right. Or maybe everyone, including him, was completely wrong. Before he could second-guess himself, Daniel started the engine, eased his SUV into traffic, and quietly followed the city bus into the night, unaware that the girl carrying empty boxes wasn't taking home trash at all. She was carrying a secret that would quietly change both of their lives. The city bus rolled through the damp streets with the steady rhythm of tires gliding over rain-darkened pavement, stopping every few blocks beneath glowing streetlights that reflected across the windows like scattered ribbons of gold. Emma Carter remained near the back, one hand resting gently on the stack of flattened cardboard beside her while the other absent-mindedly adjusted the loose sleeve of her faded hoodie. She looked out the window without really seeing the passing storefronts. Her thoughts were already somewhere else, silently measuring the hours left before tomorrow's shift began again. 3 cars behind the bus. Daniel Brooks kept enough distance that the driver would never notice the black sport utility vehicle following the route. More than once he questioned the absurdity of what he was doing. He had board meetings waiting in the morning, investment reports that demanded signatures, and a son expecting breakfast before school. Following a grocery store employee carrying empty boxes made absolutely no sense. Yet every time he considered turning onto another street, he found himself staying behind the bus instead. Curiosity had become something stronger, something that refused to be explained away by logic alone. 25 minutes later, the bus pulled into an aging neighborhood where apartment buildings leaned slightly with age and decades of harsh winters had faded their brick walls into uneven shades of gray. Emma stepped off carefully, thanked the driver with a warm smile, then gathered the cardboard into another awkward bundle before beginning the long walk down a quiet side street. Daniel parked nearly half a block away and continued on foot, careful to remain unnoticed beneath the light drizzle that had begun falling again. He expected her to stop at a recycling center, a storage unit, or perhaps a place where discarded materials could be exchanged for a few extra dollars. Instead, she continued farther into the neighborhood until she reached an old duplex with chipped white paint, a sagging front porch and flower pots that somehow still held blooming yellow chrysanthemums despite the cold weather. A porch light flickered on before Emma even reached the front steps. An elderly woman wrapped in a knitted blue cardigan opened the door with a relieved smile. "You made it before the rain got heavier," she called warmly. Emma laughed softly. "Barely." Together they carried the cardboard inside without any sign of hurry. Daniel remained across the street beneath the branches of a large maple tree, watching through the softly lit front window. He expected to see the boxes stacked against a wall or carried into a garage. Instead, Emma immediately spread several pieces across the worn wooden floor and began carefully sorting them by size. The larger sheets were placed in one pile, medium pieces in another, and the smallest scraps were trimmed with an old pair of scissors she had pulled from a kitchen drawer. Nothing was wasted. Every piece seemed to have its own purpose. The elderly woman disappeared briefly before returning with 2 mugs of tea. They spoke quietly, smiling at one another as though this unusual evening ritual had become as ordinary as preparing dinner. Daniel frowned. None of it matched the story he had imagined during the drive across town. There was no buyer, no truck collecting recyclable materials, no desperate attempt to earn a few extra dollars. Whatever she was doing required patience rather than profit. Just as he considered leaving, Emma gathered the neatly organized stacks once again, carried them through a back door, and disappeared into the darkness behind the duplex. Daniel hesitated only a second before moving closer, careful to stay hidden beyond the fence line. Beyond the backyard stood an empty lot surrounded by weathered chain-link fencing, and under the soft glow of a single motion-activated security light, he watched Emma kneel beside something hidden beyond a row of overgrown bushes. From where he stood, he could not see what had drawn her there. He only saw the remarkable tenderness in every movement she made, as though whatever waited in the shadows mattered far more than the boxes she had carried across half the city to protect. A tiny orange kitten emerged first, its paws splashing through shallow puddles before stopping at Emma's feet with complete trust. Then another appeared from beneath a leaning wooden pallet, followed by 3 more from different corners of the vacant lot. Within seconds, nearly a dozen stray cats quietly surrounded her, their eyes reflecting the pale security light like tiny stars scattered across the darkness. Daniel remained perfectly still behind the fence, afraid that even the smallest sound would interrupt what felt like an intensely private moment. Emma smiled with a warmth he had not seen once during her shift at the grocery store. The exhaustion that had weighed down her shoulders seemed to disappear as she knelt on the damp ground and greeted each animal as though they were old friends. "You waited for me," she whispered softly while scratching behind the ears of an elderly gray cat with a torn collar. "I know. Dinner is a little late tonight." She reached into her backpack and removed several small containers filled with food, carefully placing them around the lot so every cat had enough space to eat peacefully. None of them fought. None of them seemed frightened. They simply gathered around the young woman who somehow made an abandoned piece of land feel like home. After they finished eating, Emma carried the flattened cardboard into the center of the lot and began transforming it with practiced precision. She folded large sheets into simple wind barriers, layered smaller pieces beneath them for insulation, and secured everything beneath an old wooden frame that protected the shelters from blowing away during storms. Every movement revealed experience earned over many quiet evenings rather than something she had learned overnight. The elderly woman from the duplex stepped outside carrying a plastic storage bin filled with clean blankets that had clearly been washed many times. "The weather report says it might drop below 40 degrees tomorrow night," she said. Emma nodded while arranging another shelter. Then we need a few more sleeping spaces before the weekend. You cannot save every cat in the neighborhood, sweetheart. Emma looked around the empty lot where curious faces continued watching her with quiet confidence. Maybe not, she answered gently. But the ones who find this place should never have to sleep in the rain if I can help it. Daniel felt something tighten inside his chest. He had spent years discussing efficiency, quarterly growth, operating costs, and warehouse capacity. Millions of cardboard boxes passed through his company's distribution centers every month. They were measured, counted, shipped, recycled, and forgotten without a second thought. Yet here was a young woman spending hours rescuing what everyone else considered worthless and giving it another purpose, not to earn recognition, not to post photographs online, and certainly not to impress anyone. There was no audience except a handful of forgotten animals and one elderly neighbor who quietly handed Emma another stack of folded blankets. The older woman smiled knowingly. The animal shelter called today. They found homes for the two sisters from last month. Emma's eyes brightened instantly. Really? Both adopted together? Emma closed her eyes for a brief moment, her smile growing wider than Daniel had imagined possible. That is all I wanted. No celebration. No demand for credit. Just simple gratitude that two small lives had found somewhere warm to belong. A cool breeze rustled through the empty lot, carrying the faint scent of wet leaves and fresh earth. One of the cardboard roofs shifted slightly, and Emma immediately adjusted it before checking every shelter one more time, making certain each remained dry. Daniel suddenly understood that she had never been carrying empty boxes at all. She had been carrying warmth, protection, and quiet hope for creatures the rest of the city walked past without noticing. For the first time in many years, the billionaire who believed he understood the value of almost everything realized he had completely misunderstood the value of something as ordinary as a discarded cardboard box. The next evening, Daniel Brooks told himself he had no reason to drive across town after work, yet shortly after sunset his sport utility vehicle found its way back to the same quiet street without a single instruction from his calendar or his assistant. The city seemed different now, not because its buildings had changed, but because one ordinary corner of it suddenly carried a meaning he had never noticed before. He parked farther away than the night before and remained inside for several minutes, watching warm light spill from the old duplex while rain clouds drifted slowly across the darkening sky. At exactly the same time as before, Emma stepped through the front door. Carrying another bundle of carefully flattened cardboard, along with a reusable shopping bag that appeared heavier than it looked. She crossed the backyard with the calm confidence of someone repeating a promise she had made long ago. Daniel quietly followed from a respectful distance, stopping before reaching the vacant lot. This time he did not come searching for answers. He simply wanted to understand a little more. Emma greeted every familiar cat by name, smiling as they wandered toward her from beneath bushes, old wooden pallets, and the shelters she had built during the past several weeks. One tiny black kitten struggled to climb onto a dry platform inside a cardboard shelter. Emma immediately knelt beside it, gently adjusting the entrance so the little animal could step inside more easily. She laughed softly when it finally curled into the warm blanket waiting there. There was no audience to applaud her kindness. No camera recorded the moment. It existed only because she believed small acts of care still mattered, even when nobody was watching. Daniel felt an unexpected sense of embarrassment. The previous day he had assumed she collected discarded boxes because poverty left her with no other choice. Instead, she had quietly transformed things everyone ignored into protection for lives everyone overlooked. The realization stayed with him like an unanswered question. How many other people had he misunderstood simply because he had never stopped long enough to ask why they did what they did? The evening breeze became noticeably colder, carrying the first sharp hint that winter was approaching. Emma looked toward the sky before carefully checking every shelter once again, pressing each corner firmly into place so the wind could not lift it overnight. As she worked, an elderly man walking his golden retriever slowed near the fence. "They still holding up?" he asked with a friendly smile. Emma nodded. "They survived the last storm better than I expected." The man chuckled. "That is because you build them better than most people build their garages." She laughed quietly before handing him a small folded piece of cardboard. "Would you mind placing this under the Water bowl tomorrow if it rains before I get here. Of course. He accepted it without hesitation and continued down the sidewalk. Daniel noticed something remarkable. The neighborhood already knew her. Not because she was wealthy or influential, but because her quiet consistency had slowly invited other people to care as well. Compassion, he realized, could spread through a community without anyone making a speech about it. As Emma finished arranging the final shelter, a sudden gust swept through the lot, sending several loose sheets of cardboard tumbling across the damp ground toward the fence where Daniel stood hidden in the shadows. Without thinking, he stepped forward and caught them before they disappeared into the street. Emma looked up at the sound of rustling cardboard. For a brief moment their eyes met beneath the pale glow of the security light. Neither of them spoke. Daniel simply held the rescued pieces in his hands while Emma studied the unfamiliar stranger standing quietly at the edge of the lot, unaware that the man before her had already begun questioning everything he believed about success, value, and the extraordinary power hidden inside ordinary kindness. Emma blinked in quiet surprise as the stranger stepped out from the shadows, holding the runaway sheets of cardboard before the wind could carry them into the street. For a brief second, neither of them moved. The cool evening air settled between them while the distant sound of passing traffic faded into the background. Daniel Brooks walked forward slowly, careful not to startle the cats gathering near the shelters. He offered the cardboard with a small, respectful smile. I think these were trying to escape. Emma laughed softly, accepting the stack. Thank you. They usually stay where I leave them, but the weather has different plans. Daniel glanced around the vacant lot, taking in the neat rows of handmade shelters, each carefully positioned to block the wind and keep the interiors dry. You built all of this yourself? Emma nodded as she straightened one of the roofs. Over time. A few pieces every week. For the neighborhood cats? For anyone who needs a warm place until life gets a little better. Her answer lingered in the silence that followed. Daniel found himself looking at the simple shelters differently. They were not impressive because of expensive materials or perfect craftsmanship. They were impressive because every fold, every layer, and every carefully placed blanket represented hours that someone had chosen to give without expecting anything in return. One curious orange kitten wandered toward Daniel and rubbed gently against his shoe before settling beside him. Emma smiled. Looks like Oliver likes you. Daniel looked down. Oliver. He names himself every time he steals somebody's attention. Daniel chuckled, surprised by how naturally the conversation unfolded. It had been a long time since he had spoken to someone who expected absolutely nothing from him. She did not recognize his face, his company, or the countless interviews that occasionally appeared on business television. To her, he was simply another person standing in a quiet lot on a chilly evening. Do you come here every night? He asked. Unless I am sick or the roads are closed. That sounds like a full-time job. Emma shook her head gently. No. My full-time job is paying rent. This is just something I promised myself I would never stop doing. Daniel hesitated before asking the question that had followed him since the grocery store. Why cardboard? Emma picked up one of the flattened boxes and ran her hand across its surface. Because people think it has reached the end of its purpose. She smiled thoughtfully. Most things have another chance if someone is willing to look closely enough. Before Daniel could respond, the elderly woman from the duplex stepped through the back gate carrying a small paper bag. Emma, I baked too many oatmeal cookies again. She noticed Daniel and smiled warmly. You must be the gentleman who rescued the cardboard. Emma accepted the bag with a grateful laugh. Mrs. Henderson always bakes too many. That is because somebody has to make sure you remember to eat. Mrs. Henderson looked at Daniel. Would you like one? Daniel accepted a cookie with genuine appreciation. It was warm, homemade, and unexpectedly comforting. For a moment, he forgot about quarterly earnings, investor meetings, and tomorrow's schedule. He simply stood beneath the evening sky sharing cookies with two people whose kindness felt effortless. As he prepared to leave, Emma thanked him once more for catching the cardboard. I appreciate the help. Daniel looked at the shelters one final time before meeting her eyes. I think I was the one who received something tonight. Emma tilted her head slightly, unsure what he meant, but she smiled anyway. As Daniel walked back toward his vehicle, he realized he had come searching for the reason behind a bundle of discarded boxes. Instead, He had discovered a woman whose quiet compassion had already begun rebuilding something inside him that he had not even realized was broken. The following Saturday arrived wrapped in clear skies and crisp autumn air, and for the first weekend in months, Daniel Brooks canceled every meeting that could wait. Instead of reviewing financial reports at his dining room table, he stood in the kitchen making pancakes while 8-year-old Noah quietly pushed blueberries around his plate without much interest. Ever since losing his mother 3 years earlier, the little boy had become painfully reserved. He answered questions politely, finished his homework without reminders, and rarely complained, yet the bright laughter that once filled the house had slowly faded into silence. Daniel often wondered whether he had been so busy trying to provide everything his son needed that he had forgotten the one thing Noah wanted most, simple moments that could never be scheduled. "How would you feel about going somewhere different today?" Daniel asked gently. Noah looked up with mild curiosity. "Where?" Daniel smiled. "I am not completely sure yet." Less than an hour later, they parked a short distance from the familiar duplex. Daniel had not planned the visit carefully enough to explain why they were there. He only knew he wanted Noah to see a place where kindness existed without applause. As they approached the vacant lot, Emma was already arranging fresh blankets inside several cardboard shelters, while a growing crowd of neighborhood cats wandered around her feet. She looked up, surprised to recognize the quiet stranger from earlier in the week. Then her eyes noticed the young boy standing beside him. Her smile softened immediately. "Good morning," she said warmly. "You brought a helper." Daniel nodded. "I hope that is all right. Helpers are always welcome." Noah remained close to his father at first, observing the cats from a safe distance. One small calico kitten cautiously wandered toward him before stopping only a few feet away. Emma knelt beside the kitten without trying to force the moment. "Her name is Daisy," she said softly. "She is curious about everyone, but she likes it when people let her make the first move." Noah nodded without speaking. He stayed perfectly still. After several long seconds, Daisy stepped closer and gently brushed against his sneaker before curling around his ankle. The corners of Noah's mouth lifted almost without him realizing it. Emma pretended not to notice, allowing the quiet moment to belong entirely to him. Daniel noticed it anyway. It was the first genuine smile he had seen on his son's face in longer than he wanted to admit. As the morning passed, Emma showed Noah how to fold cardboard into simple wind barriers, and explained why each opening faced away from the strongest winter gusts. She spoke to him as though he were capable rather than fragile, inviting him to help instead of treating him like a child who needed constant instruction. Noah listened carefully, asking small questions that gradually became longer conversations. Before long, he was laughing when Oliver attempted to climb inside an unfinished shelter before Emma could finish building it. The sound caught Daniel completely off guard. It echoed through the empty lot with a warmth that seemed almost unfamiliar after so many quiet years. Mrs. Henderson stepped onto the porch carrying a tray of warm apple cider, and smiled knowingly when she saw Noah laughing among the cats. She leaned toward Daniel and whispered kindly, "Sometimes children remember how to smile when they see someone else caring without expecting anything back." Daniel looked toward Emma, who was helping Noah straighten one final piece of cardboard before thanking him as though he had completed something truly important. In that simple exchange, Daniel understood something he had been unable to buy, solve, or manage through determination alone. Emma had not tried to heal his son. She had simply shared the quiet kindness that guided her own life every day. And somehow, without even realizing it, she had opened a small window where hope could finally find its way back into Noah's heart. During the week that followed, Noah asked the same question every afternoon when Daniel picked him up from school. "Are we going to visit the cats today?" It was the first time in years that his son looked forward to anything outside the walls of their home, and Daniel found himself rearranging conference calls, postponing dinners, and leaving the office before sunset whenever he could. Every visit revealed another quiet detail about Emma that made admiration replace the assumptions he had once carried. She knew every stray by name, remembered which ones preferred dry food, which ones needed medicine mixed into their meals, and which shelters stayed warmest when the north wind swept through the neighborhood. She never hurried. She never complained. She simply showed up. One chilly Thursday evening, Daniel arrived carrying several unopened bags of premium cat food and a brand new outdoor pet shelter he had purchased on the way across town. It was insulated, weather-resistant, and far sturdier than anything made from cardboard. Emma looked genuinely surprised as he placed everything near the fence. "I thought these might help," he said with a hopeful smile. "You should not have to do all of this alone." Emma thanked him sincerely before running her hand across the smooth roof of the shelter. It was beautifully made. Better than anything she could ever afford. She stood quietly for a long moment before looking back at Daniel. "May I ask you something?" "Of course. Did you buy this because you thought I needed money? Or because you thought the cats needed help?" Daniel hesitated. The question was simple, yet the answer was not. "Maybe both," he admitted honestly. Emma nodded with understanding instead of judgment. There is nothing wrong with generosity. But sometimes generosity solves the wrong problem. Daniel listened carefully. She continued arranging blankets inside one of the cardboard shelters before speaking again. "These cats do not care whether their shelter costs $10 or $200. They only need something dry, warm, and safe. The cardboard works because there is always more of it. If one gets damaged, I can replace it tomorrow. If this beautiful shelter breaks, I cannot." Daniel looked down at the expensive structure he had proudly carried into the lot. For the first time, he realized she was thinking about sustainability rather than appearance. She had never been searching for the best materials. She had been searching for the most dependable solution. Emma smiled gently, sensing his disappointment. "Please do not misunderstand me. I truly appreciate your kindness." She paused before adding, "But if you really want to help, there is something much more valuable than buying things." "What is it?" "Ask stores not to throw away cardboard that can still be used. Ask people to donate blankets they no longer need. Help me save what already exists before buying something new." Daniel stared at the rows of simple shelters stretching across the lot. Her request contained no ambition for herself. She had not asked for a better apartment, a larger paycheck, or even help paying for food. She had asked him to prevent useful things from becoming waste. Noah, who had been quietly petting Daisy nearby, looked up with an innocent smile. "Dad, that means more cats can have homes." Daniel smiled back at his son before turning toward Emma once again. In boardrooms, he had spent years discussing supply chains, inventory, and efficiency. Standing beside a vacant lot filled with handmade cardboard shelters, he suddenly understood those words in an entirely different way. Emma had not refused his kindness. She had expanded it into something far greater than either of them could accomplish alone, and for the first time since they met, Daniel began wondering whether the greatest gift he could offer was not his wealth, but the influence he had spent a lifetime building. Nearly 3 weeks passed before Emma received an unexpected phone call during her lunch break at the grocery store. The friendly voice on the other end introduced herself as an assistant from Brooks Logistics and explained that the company was hosting a community sustainability meeting the following Saturday. They hoped Emma could attend as a guest to share her experience with reusing discarded materials. Emma politely explained that there had to be some mistake because she was not an expert. She stocked shelves, folded cardboard, and looked after stray cats. The assistant simply replied, "Sometimes the people with the most important ideas never call themselves experts." After a moment of hesitation, Emma agreed to come. Saturday morning arrived with bright sunshine and a cold breeze that carried the colors of late autumn across downtown. Emma borrowed her nicest navy blue sweater from Mrs. Henderson, brushed the wrinkles from her simple skirt, and rode the city bus to the headquarters of Brooks Logistics. She stood outside the modern glass building for several seconds, quietly wondering whether she belonged there at all. Everything around her reflected success: polished stone walkways, carefully trimmed trees, and employees moving confidently through the entrance with identification badges around their necks. Taking a slow breath, she stepped inside. A receptionist greeted her warmly and escorted her toward the executive conference room on the top floor. As the elevator doors opened, Emma noticed framed photographs celebrating the company's history, community partnerships, and national awards. Then she reached the conference room and stopped in complete surprise. Standing at the front of the room, welcoming board members, department directors, and regional managers, was Daniel Brooks. He was dressed in a tailored navy suit instead of the casual jacket she had always seen near the vacant lot. The quiet man who had carried runaway cardboard across a windy evening was now confidently leading one of the largest logistics companies in the region. Their eyes met across the room. Daniel smiled with the same warmth she already knew. "Good morning, Emma. I'm very glad you came." She looked around, still trying to understand. "You work here?" Several executives exchanged amused smiles before Daniel answered gently. "Ido. I started the company many years ago." Emma blinked in disbelief. "You never told me." Daniel shook his head. "Because I wanted you to know me before my job." There was no pride in his voice, only honesty. He invited Emma to stand beside him before addressing everyone gathered in the room. "Over the past several weeks," he began, "I met someone who completely changed the way I think about waste, responsibility, and community." A large screen behind him displayed photographs, not of expensive equipment or financial charts, but of simple cardboard shelters protecting stray cats from cold nights. The room became silent. Daniel continued, "Every month our warehouses recycle thousands of usable boxes. I believe that was responsible. I recently learned that responsible is not always the same as meaningful." He turned toward Emma. "She reminded me that value does not disappear simply because something has fulfilled its first purpose." Then he announced a new company initiative. Every Brooks Logistics warehouse would partner with local animal shelters, community centers, schools, and neighborhood organizations to donate reusable cardboard, packing materials, blankets, and supplies before sending anything to recycling. Employees would also receive paid volunteer hours to support local community projects. The room filled with genuine applause, but Emma barely heard it. She looked at Daniel with quiet astonishment, realizing that the influence she had asked him to use had reached farther than she ever imagined possible. Without changing who she was or asking for anything herself, one ordinary conversation beside a handful of handmade shelters had just begun changing thousands of lives she would never even meet. Spring arrived quietly, almost unnoticed, until the first warm Saturday morning filled the neighborhood with birdsong instead of icy wind. The vacant lot behind Mrs. Henderson's duplex no longer looked forgotten. Fresh flowers lined the fence, volunteers replaced worn blankets every weekend, and sturdy cardboard shelters stood beside small wooden ones built by neighbors who had learned that even the simplest gift could become something meaningful. The greatest change, however, was not the appearance of the lot. It was the people. Families stopped by with reusable supplies instead of throwing them away. Children carefully folded clean cardboard beside retirees who happily shared stories over cups of coffee. Employees from Brooks Logistics arrived wearing work gloves instead of business suits, unloading boxes that had been rescued before reaching the recycling trucks. No cameras followed them. They came because one quiet decision had become part of the company's culture, rather than a publicity campaign. Emma Carter still worked evening shifts at the grocery store, still thanked the night manager before carrying home whatever cardboard remained, and still believed that kindness only mattered when it became a habit instead of an event. She never accepted praise comfortably. Whenever someone thanked her for inspiring the growing community effort, she smiled and answered the same way. People already had kind hearts. They just needed someone to remind them to use them. Daniel Brooks visited whenever his schedule allowed, often arriving with Noah after school. The little boy who had once spoken only when necessary now hurried through the gate carrying blankets or bags of food, while Oliver and Daisy raced to greet him. His teachers had begun mentioning how much more confident he seemed in class. He laughed more often, volunteered to help classmates, and even started drawing pictures again. One afternoon he handed Emma a crayon drawing showing cats sleeping safely inside colorful cardboard shelters beneath a bright blue sky. Across the top he had carefully written, "Nothing is useless if somebody still cares." Emma felt her eyes fill with quiet emotion as she thanked him for the picture and promised to keep it forever. Several months later, Brooks Logistics released its annual community report. Thousands of pounds of reusable cardboard had been donated instead of discarded. Animal shelters, schools, food pantries, and neighborhood organizations throughout the state had benefited from materials that once would have been forgotten. Other companies began adopting similar programs after seeing the results. A simple idea born inside a vacant lot quietly spread farther than anyone expected. One evening, as the sun settled behind the rooftops in shades of gold and amber, Daniel and Emma stood beside the familiar fence while Noah laughed nearby, carefully helping two younger children build another weatherproof shelter. Daniel looked across the peaceful scene before speaking softly. I used to believe success meant building something bigger every year. Emma followed his gaze toward the families working together. And now? He smiled. Now I think success is helping more people build something that lasts after you leave. Emma nodded thoughtfully. My father used to tell me that the world throws away too many things before discovering what they are truly worth. Daniel looked at the rows of shelters, the smiling neighbors, and his son whose laughter carried through the evening air with effortless joy. Then he looked back at Emma. Neither of them had rescued the other in the way stories usually describe. She had never asked to be saved, and he had never expected to be changed. Yet somewhere between a stack of forgotten cardboard boxes and a handful of quiet evenings, they had both found something far more valuable than either of them had been searching for. Sometimes the greatest miracles do not begin with extraordinary wealth or impossible luck. Sometimes they begin with one ordinary person choosing to protect what everyone else is ready to leave behind, because when kindness gives forgotten things a second chance, it often gives forgotten hearts one as well.